With this video, we're going to begin our exploration of Chapter 7, which covers our nervous system. Now, for me, I'm a neuroscientist, so this is the most exciting chapter, so I hope that you guys enjoy it too. We'll start small, and then we will get bigger. So first, we're going to talk about the organization of the nervous system, and our objectives are to be able to list the general functions of the nervous system, and then to distinguish between our central and our peripheral nervous systems. So let's think for a minute, what are the major functions of our nervous system? What do they allow us to do? Well, there are really three components to our nervous system that all work together. The first is a sensory input function. So our nervous system allows us to take in information about the world around us. We also have an integration, and this occurs in our central nervous system to process all of the input we're receiving from our senses, and then to decide on an output. And that sometimes is a skeletal muscle contraction, and other times it's another biological response. So we have an input, integration, and output. And this might remind you of that homeostatic control network that we talked about. It's set up in a similar way of integration coming from input leading to output. We can break down our nervous system into two major components: our central nervous system, which is our brain and our spinal cord, and our peripheral nervous system, which are the nerves of our body. The peripheral nervous system can be further broken down into afferent nerves, which contain sensory information and approach the central nervous system, and our efferent nerves, which are our motor nerves that leave the central nervous system. Those motor nerves can further be broken down into somatic, which are voluntary. Again, our skeletal muscles, we control that with conscious thought, or autonomic, which means involuntary. And these are things like our cardiac and smooth muscles and our glands. That autonomic section has two divisions to it as well: parasympathetic and sympathetic, which we will discuss in more detail at the end of the chapter. So again, that afferent division, this is our somatic sensory fibers that come from our skin, our muscles, or joints, as well as visceral sensory fibers from our visceral organs. And that efferent division controls both voluntary and involuntary motor nerves. So now let's talk a little bit about the structure and function of our nervous tissue. Our objectives here are to state the functions of neurons and glia, describe the general structure of a neuron, detail the composition of gray versus white matter, talk about the different types of sensory receptors, and most of the time will be spent talking about how nerve impulses are transmitted before we finish up with a conversation on reflex arcs. So glia are our support cells. There are two major types of cells in the nervous system. The neurons get all the action. Those are kind of like the superheroes. And the glia, they're the sidekick. You can also see them referred to as neuroglia. Glia is just the term that I am more familiar with. And glia are cells that support, insulate, protect the neurons. And the neurons, they're super delicate. So we're going to see as a theme throughout this chapter that there are a lot of systems in place to protect our neurons. And that's because these cells are post-mitotic, meaning that they cannot undergo division anymore, mitosis. And as such, they need a lot of help to help them because they won't be able to replace themselves, unlike other things like our skin, for example. So let's now talk about the 6 major types of glia that we have. 4 of them, the first 4 are in our central nervous system, and the last 2 are in our peripheral nervous system. So in our central nervous system, we have cells called astrocytes, and these have a host of different functions. The main function is to connect our neurons to adjacent blood vessels. And in this way, they allow for the maintenance of nutrition and ion balance. They help with any sort of minor repairs that the neurons need. And they actually help form our blood-brain barrier, which separates the system in our body from what's happening in our brain. Astrocytes can also propagate calcium waves, and as we know, calcium is important for signaling, and they've been shown to have a more diverse set of functions that we're just now starting to understand. So if you're interested in glia, astrocytes are kind of like a hot topic for research. Microglia are also a hot topic for research, and that's because everyone is interested in the immune cells. And microglia are the immune cells of our central nervous system. So they roam around your brain and they help gobble up any invading cells. We also have endomal cells, which line our cavities. So your brain has these fluid-filled cavities called ventricles, and they have these endomal cells that have these little hairs, and the hairs move and they propel that cerebrospinal fluid, the fluid in the cavities. Last, in our central nervous system, we have oligodendrocytes, and these help form the myelin in our central nervous system. Now, myelin is kind of like fat that surrounds our nerves. If you think about a nerve like an electrical wire, the myelin is the insulation, and they help keep that electrical signal inside the neuron, and in that way, they speed up the signal and the speed at which it can travel down a neuron. So we want to think about why myelin is important. Remember, neurons have an electricity to them. So the two cells in our peripheral nervous system also have a cell involved with myelin, and that's our Schwann cells. So Schwann cells form the myelin sheath in our peripheral nervous system. And the peripheral nervous system also has satellite cells, which provide cushioning around the cell body of our neurons. So in these videos, we talked about this overall structure of the nervous system and our glia. Stay tuned for the next video where we delve more into the structure and function of our neurons.